It would be a good idea if we stopped now and took a look at a practical historical example of not only of the nature of the phenomenon, but of its seriousness as well. And that example is the problem that the Western world has always had with Islam. Basically, what the Christian Europe did hundreds of years ago, after it felt that it had won the contest with Islam, was that it sort of swept it under the carpet. Islam no longer was an issue at all for the Christian world, for the European world. And then, of course, once we get into the 19th and 20th centuries with Western economic power, the technological developments and scientific developments of the West and so on, that consolidated it. Islam simply didn't count any longer. At least that was the theory. And now all of a sudden, Islam has come roaring out from underneath the carpet, and it has become the #1 preoccupation of political life in our period of history in the beginning of the 21st century, because it's the religion that at one time was so beneficial to mankind has now been hijacked, in large measure at least, by some of the worst people probably on the face of the planet. And the result is that it permeates all aspects of our life, both on the larger political level, even on the simple level of human life, of people who want to travel from one country to another by plane and so on. How did this come about, and why did it happen? More important, even than that, of course, are the implications. If you look back to what historians call, quite rightly, in European development, the Dark Ages, Europe lived for centuries in what? In darkness, in filth, in squalor, in ignorance, in superstition, in violence, in disorder. And this was the result, we're told, of the collapse of Roman civilization and so on. Fine. But right across the Mediterranean, right across the river, you could almost say, was this brilliant civilization, one of the most brilliant civilizations the world has ever seen. In fact, I suppose it's safe to say that we have never had a civilization in the whole history of human life on this planet that burst with such brilliance in so short a time and permeated all aspects of human life. There's nothing that Islamic civilization didn't seem to be able to accomplish. Take a look at mathematics, every branch of mathematics, trigonometry, geometry, algebra, the invention of the zero, the whole decimal system. It revolutionized mathematical conceptions. The same thing in sciences, physics, chemistry, optics, you name it, medicine. And along with huge advances in medicine, hospitals, actual public hospitals in the cities of the Islamic world. You had these great cities which had street lights, running water, they had museums, they had hospitals, they had universities. And the same thing was true of the other arts, music, even practical, simple things like being able to mail a letter in Lebanon and having it delivered in Morocco, writing a draft, a bank draft in Spain and having it cashed in Persia on the other side of the world, and the whole civilization functioning as, unlike Roman civilization, with one common language and with one common moral code. I mean, it is breathtaking. And a civilization that was deeply moral. A civilization in which a man could be not only a warrior, but he could also be a spiritual mystic. He might be a poet. He might be an administrator. But because there was no difference, he was only one human being, he had all these different faculties. It was not a world of endless divisions, this being separated from that, and so on. Now, obviously, you can't have that happening on one side of the river, so to speak, and darkness on the other side, and so inevitably, the Europeans began to borrow, and especially as the Muslims began to invade Europe, first of all in Sicily, southern Spain, southern Italy, and on a very grand scale, of course, in Spain. And the Europeans benefited from this. The first university in Europe was Toledo in Spain, a Muslim university, but Christians came from France and Germany and studied. And then, of course, that produced Oxford in due course, and the Sorbonne and Montpellier and Bologna and Western universities as well, but very limited. Very, very limited in the studies that they were willing to contemplate. And the limit, of course, ironically enough, was the source of all these wonders. The one thing that could not be studied, that could not be taken seriously, was the Quran, which had produced this Islamic civilization, because Islam was the work of the devil as far as the church was concerned, and so on. This went on not for 1 or 2 or 3 generations, we're talking about 500 years. It boggles the mind. It boggles the mind how people living so close to such a cornucopia of wonders would not automatically go to the source, no matter what the church said, but nevertheless, that's what actually happened. Now, as Baha'is, we have a number of benefits, but one of them certainly is the extraordinary frankness of the Guardian on certain subjects. He says quite frankly that the Renaissance, the European Renaissance, was not a Christian phenomenon, but an Islamic phenomenon. He credits Islam with the Renaissance, and I think we're in a period of history now where Western historians are beginning to nibble at the edges of this, very nervously at the edges of this subject, but sooner or later I think this is going to be recognized. But that doesn't change the fact, of course, that basically Europe missed the bus. A whole people, or peoples, a whole continent of people literally missed the bus, because it wasn't only the pointed arch, for example, however valuable that was to Gothic architecture, that was there to be borrowed, if you like. It was the moral and spiritual insights of the Quran that the West denied itself. What do I mean by that? Christianity, of course, is very much a religion that emphasizes peace, and that's wonderful. The reality, of course, is that human nature is not peaceful. Human beings are not peaceful until they get educated. Ultimately, I suppose that will happen in the future of our own time. But the Quran deals with it. The Quran is a revelation of God that is highly realistic in terms of human nature. And so the Quran explains that in warfare, because it assumes that warfare will be a human activity for a long, long time to come, that warfare should be disciplined in this fashion and so on. Diplomacy should be of this nature. The relationship between reason and faith is not only encouraged, it's logical to, if you read the Quran, this is logical. Muslim theologians struggled with it a long time, but Islamic civilization demonstrated the fact that as the human being is one, so are the activities that are the positive activities that humanity is capable of developing. Well, the fact that that the West denied itself this kind of discipline, the consequences have been appalling. You can imagine, it's no use saying, well, we don't want to have, the West benefited from not having a religion that has produced the such things as the Taliban and Al-Qaeda and so on today. The Taliban and Al-Qaeda are features of the degeneration of Islam, not of its vitality. There are all kinds of features of the degeneration of Christianity that I don't need to go into, but that would certainly hold their own with the Taliban and the Al-Qaeda, starting with the Inquisition and going downstairs from there on. The West has suffered. The West has demonstrated its capacity with Judaism, with the Bible, and with the Gospel to explore possibilities in these areas of divine guidance in a way that has illuminated the whole of civilization. You can imagine what would have happened if at the universities in Europe the Quran had been studied with the whole range of its moral teachings, studied by a people who were on the verge of exploring and conquering North America. Well, we didn't do that. Why revisit all this past history after all it's 1,400 years ago? Well, we revisit it because we're still paying the price. It's useless for Christians, for example, to say, well, what kind of a scripture deals with warfare? We're not supposed to have warfare. Well, the answer is, then why have you Christians had so much of it? Because after all, Christians have killed millions more people than the rest of humanity put together. So indeed, we're not supposed to have warfare. God intends to gradually train us out of it. And the Quran is one stage that would have been hugely beneficial. And so I think from a present-day Baha'i point of view, the reason, in my view, I don't know, of course, but I suspect that the reason why the Guardian emphasized so strongly studying Islam, and studying it, he says, from the sources, not from Western commentaries on it, studying the original Islamic sources, being unafraid, examining the whole thing, is because we would have filled in this huge gap in the evolution of Western civilization, and in doing so, we would have prepared ourselves far more effectively to embrace, to understand the purpose of Baha'u'llah in bringing about a global civilization. Now, ironically, the delicate maiden who was supposed to be protected by this refusal to look at the Quran, to take Islam seriously, was, of course, the Christian faith. All of this rejection of Islam as the work of Satan or something was to make certain that Christianity remained protected and pure and so on in Europe. But in borrowing all of these advantages of Islamic civilization, beginning with the Renaissance and leading on into the Enlightenment in due course, Europe built a new civilization in which Christianity had no place. It built a civilization in which there was a growing gap between faith, between the insights of religion on the one hand, and the real world that people had to live in their day-to-day life, and that they wanted to live in because they were deriving all kinds of benefits from it. So I think it's helpful from a Baha'i point of view, if you're going to look at the evolution of religion, as Baha'u'llah and the Bab teach it, if we understand that this is a very serious business. The very idea that a whole continent of people could have missed the boat, the whole continent of people could have paid the appalling price that Europe has paid for rejecting the revelation of God for the time that revelation. To look at that, one realizes how serious it is that we as individuals today keep up, that we understand, that we follow, we are eager to see the next stage in the evolution of the cause of God, in this case, the revelation of Baha'u'llah, for our time. it's not that the cause is going to run off the road and so on. We are living in the age of the coming age of humankind. So we are collectively, the human race, guided by Baha'u'llah, is in the process of building what has traditionally been called the kingdom of God on earth, a global society and a universal civilization and so on. And that's going to be a stage by stage by stage process. Obviously, since we've been given a huge privilege of participating in that, of contributing to that, it's vital to us that we know where we are at any given time and that we not allow ourselves to, through inattention or distraction or whatever you want to call it, to miss the bus, so that we're standing here by the side of the road all by ourselves reflecting on things, and the cause of God is miles down the highway and probably accelerating. We're going to take a look in this series of talks at some of the implications of the different stages, some of them that we have already gone through, the stage that we're at right now, and the obvious implications of the immediate future.